Hi guys, it's Maynard. It's Tuesday, and so we're excited to come to you today with another Close of Business show. I think we've got, I said it last week, I said last week will be our best show ever. I think this week will be our best show ever. We're really lucky because we've got two guests who are straight from the front of the oil and gas battles of today. We've got Commissioner Ryan Sitton of the Railroad Commission, and we also have Mayor Patrick Payton of Midland, Texas, the capital of Midland, and our favorite basin. I think all of us, not to take anything away from the other basins, but we're going to get started today and talk a little bit about what's been going on with oil. There's been a little bit. Mike and Colin are going to take it from here. They started the discussion today by saying, "Hey, how about that $50 rally?" Which, when you start negative and you end up at 13, that's a pretty good day. We'll look forward to another 50 tomorrow, guys. But Colin and Mike, why don't you kick us off and help us understand a little bit of what's going on in the markets?
Yeah, sure. I think what's important to understand is what we saw yesterday with the negative $40 price appearing in the expiring May contract truly is unprecedented in the liquids market, but it is something that we see in other energy markets from time to time when storage and logistical constraints are breached. It happens in natural gas, it happens in power. So while we certainly did not expect to see a sub-zero price and certainly not a negative $40 price, it's not as unnatural or uneconomic as it might appear to be at first blush. In fact, the first calls I got yesterday were from longstanding friends who said, "What hedge fund just blew up?" And we went really carefully through all of the trades from the first trade that was priced at sub-zero at 2:08 p.m. Eastern all the way through 8 p.m. And what we found is that there were only 9,900 contracts that actually traded below zero. We could see that it was a sequence of orders that looked like a market order. In other words, the get me out trade. And the total of all the economic value that was traded below zero was only $175 million relative to the entire size of the oil market. Put that in one other way of thinking about it, the sub-zero trades yesterday accounted for only 4% of the daily volume. So 96% of yesterday was in positive territory, 4% was in negative territory. And so, it really all begs the question, what was the economic purpose of what was happening there? And the purpose was to avoid taking delivery. You had a number of people who were probably speculators. They were long the May, they were short the June, and the one thing that they could not do and did not want to do was to take delivery in this futures market that settles with physical delivery. And so whatever price had to appear to get them out of their trades, that's the price we got. The people who are on the other side of those trades were probably commercials who were already short, in other words, producers who had hedges, and or midstream people who had the capacity to take a barrel of crude and put it into storage, probably because they had lease rights. Now that all that's been cleaned up, the market settled at $10.01 today at expiry, and in the newly prompt June, we have prices more in the $13.25 range.
So let me ask you, Mike, while this was going on yesterday in the oil market, what was going on with investors, the energy stocks, and what kind of conversations have you been having? Do people understand things as well as Colin just laid them out, even pretty experienced energy investors?
I'd say generally no. Colin's gone into a lot more detail than people are looking at. I think people were expecting the May contract to go off pretty weak, but definitely not negative. They obviously know that storage is running out. They've been thinking about by mid-May that storage would be out in Cushing, and definitely May would be under pressure and June would be under pressure. And we've seen that play out here over the last couple of days. I think what Colin did mention, what I'd also like to mention as well, is that the amount of open interest in the May contract into expiry was really, really big. So this really, really set up the situation. You just had too many people trying to come through just a really small door here. That's been cleared. But the issue is if you look at what's going on with the USO and a lot of this other stuff that's going on, there is a lot of open interest in the next 2 months as well. Probably 30 to 40% higher than it usually is. And you know what, if we get to this position next month near expiry, you could have an issue as well, because we're definitely going to have lower storage. And so I think most people are expecting that there's going to be weakness. So it didn't really come as a surprise. Just the magnitude and negativity took people by surprise.
So Colin or Mike, why did we have such a high open interest position, and why do the markets have that feature now when they haven't before?
Well, what it looks like happened is the drop below $20 brought in value players. And we think that a lot of the individuals who put on these trades were not aware that this market would be allowed to trade below zero. So if you think about it, there's this wide spread between May and June. And if your view is that those two prices in the futures market converge toward each other, you're somewhat indifferent about whether the June price falls or the May price rises. About an hour before the sub-zero price first appeared, the CME clarified that negative prices were indeed valid prices under these logistical constraints. And then that opened up the long leg to be able to go to any price below zero that it wanted to. So it completely demolished the logic of the trade. And as Mike said, to come into the day before expiry with over 100,000 contracts and to have basically all of them want to go square by the end of the day is a very narrow door to push through. And one thing that Mike and I were talking about earlier today is the Brent market was somewhat resilient to all that was happening yesterday. It's a seaborne market. It can settle through financial clearing as opposed to physical. And so it was somewhat removed from what was happening in Cushing, Oklahoma. Today, that is not the case. We did see that the prompt Brent contract in particular, not only did it go down, it is now below $20 for the first time since 2002. So we are seeing some relinking of these two markets with the kind of negative complexion that Mike just described.
Yeah, and I think Colin hits a perfect point. I think most people have been looking at the storage issues been really concentrated in the U.S., and what they realize with Brent finally breaking today is it is going to be a global issue. Storage is going to be an issue globally. One of the things I want to mention, though, too, is, from an equity investment standpoint, if you look at this week, it's only been 2 days in, energy has outperformed the market. E&Ps have outperformed the market. Every story, no matter the news channel, has been talking about the breakdown in crude oil, but energy stocks have been able to outperform. I think that's a good sign. And what that also tells you is a lot of people were expecting bad news with the May contract. Similarly, everyone I talk to now, the question is not how, is the June contract going to be bad? It's going to be how bad is it going to be, and is it going to go negative? And so I do think that, the action of these stocks, tell you a lot.
It seems like what we've been used to over a pretty long period of time is whatever the news is, the reaction in the stocks is even worse. So now we have something that is, the negativity is something we've never seen before, but yet you have the stocks holding up. Does it really mean that investors are that hopeful or that rational or that they can really see through that? Aren't you a little bit surprised at that?
I think the investors look and say, you know what? It's, we're going to have a lot of production cuts. We're going to have a lot of shut-ins. The market's going to basically be, oversupplied near term. But, as we look at the second half of the year, prices are going to go higher. They're looking through that right now. Like I said, they're not optimistic, but they're immune from like a lot of the bad news at this point in time.
And one of the things that investors seem to be aware of is that they know that the sub-zero price has never been seen before in the WTI futures market, or even in the Cushing light sweet market for that matter. But they can see that the system is starting to heal, that supply and demand are rapidly being forced into equilibration. And what's important is when we try to tally up what's happened with production cuts, whether they're voluntary or involuntary, we can already count up 700,000 barrels per day of liquids production in the United States that has already been shut in, 165,000 each from the Permian and the Bakken, 125,000 barrels from the Eagle Ford. So then throw on top of that some of the announcements that have come in recent days, and we can pencil in with pretty high confidence that 1 million barrels per day are already slated to be out of this market by the middle part of the year. And the historic analog to look at is the summer of 1998, when we first had the term super contango coined, when Indonesian VLCCs were showing up as floating storage in the Gulf. And it took about 39 weeks for that process to move forward. So we'll see if this recovery can happen quicker or slower, but that would be the analog that we would direct your attention to.
And I think the area that has really shown people's interest has been the natural gas producers. I mean, I think people look at what's going to happen on the supply side, and they realize the market from an S&D standpoint of natural gas is going to go to a serious deficit here. They are buying these names up. If you look at the 24-month strip, it's up to around 260 now. It's rallied, but the prompt hasn't rallied yet. I think it's only a matter of time. You're going to see a prompt going. Guys are buying into that right now, the natural gas names. Most of them up for 20-25% for the year, whereas you have a lot of the oil stocks are down 45 to 50% a year. So I think once crude oil fundamentals start to get better, I think there's going to be buyers of those stocks.
You know, I happened to be part of something today where we had a bunch of statistics up, and this was one that was, I thought, shocking. Since February 14th, which was the peak of the S&P 500, oil is down 65% since then. The Appalachian natural gas stocks are up 67% since that time. Do you think this is contributing to some optimism overall in the investor space, just seeing something perform like that, or?
Yeah, I think investors look and say, if you take, the biggest issue for investors over the last couple of years is it's just been supply. Demand has been good. Demand is now not good, and supply is getting much better. Eventually, demand is going to improve. The supply will be taken out. It's going to be the first time you've seen, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, where supply is working in your favor and demand is going to be working in your favor, which means higher prices. And I think that backdrop is going to start to attract investors to the space.
So one question for you, Colin, as we kind of wrap this up and turn to Commissioner Sitton. What you were describing in terms of the financial players getting involved in the markets, holding contracts that late in the month, et cetera, that sort of sounds like risk-on behavior. And everything that we've been watching in these markets over the last 6 to 8 weeks has said, put your money in your mattress. What is that a right way to think about that, or was there a risk on trade in oil?
I think there's no question. There's a risk on trade, not only in oil, but also in natural gas. We can see it in the CFTC statistics for commitment of traders in the managed money component. There was a bit of a singed factor here. So we'll see if perhaps some of the speculators learned something that they didn't quite know that they were going to learn this week. But as painful and ugly and horrible as everything was in the last 48 hours, I think the takeaway would be that this is what bottoms start to look like. And that if there's a silver lining to all of this, looking out on that 2-year horizon that Mike's talking about, we can document in many ways positioning beginning to get in front of it. There's stealth rallies. They're not going to be fast. You can't skip this step. But for the first time in years, I like the way that Mike put it, you have both supply and demand pushing you forward. And if anything, with all of this largesse coming from fiscal and monetary authorities, you probably have inflation also giving us the contours of that macro environment.
So let's jump to you, Commissioner. You've been a popular guy here lately. I watched you did a nice job on CNBC representing all of us today. I think, oil and gas, we are a community, and it's when any of us steps in front of the TV camera, we're all pulling for each other. So you did a nice job. But what would you tell us about You've been part of these discussions about proration. It's obviously pointed at reducing supply, which is a good thing. I think what we're probably all debating is the tactics of getting there. But maybe just ask you to kick it off. What's your latest thinking on the discussion around proration, and how well are we doing as an industry debating that in a thoughtful way?
Well, good question. Both. Here's my thinking on proration, and to put it in context, what statute says or state law says is that the Railroad Commission is supposed to prevent waste. In fact, we don't have an option. That's our charge. And actually, one of the areas in which the statute defines waste. It says very clearly that waste is production in excess of reasonable market demand. Now, there's some debate as to what, how you measure waste. In fact, I think really the debate is not what the statute says. It's pretty clear. It's how do you measure waste? And then, how do you, what this term reasonable, what does reasonable really mean? I don't think anybody debates right now whether or not there's oversupply or a lack of demand, especially, given the big spread of 25 or 30 million barrels a day that the world is seeing right now. The question is really, depending on how you measure it and what you figure is reasonable, then what action could government take, if we take one, that would actually be supportive? I mean, you heard Colin say a minute ago, and I agree with him in the numbers we're seeing, that probably 1 million barrels a day of production is already offline in the United States. The challenge is from a macro perspective for a government official is, okay, is there something that might happen in the market or not happen in the market due to this massive imbalance of supply and demand that may have a long-term detrimental effect on the entire industry? I think that really is the philosophical question, because you would say, let's rewind to 2006, right? Prices got down to $27 a barrel. If you'd asked me, Ryan, do you think we should consider proration? I would have said no, because there was corrections happening due to the Saudis upping their output at the end of 2014 that ran all the way through 2015. And you saw this imbalance of supply and demand, which was only a couple million barrels, slowly but surely working its way through, and investment was coming off, and you were watching things balance. In this environment, it's different. In a matter of literally 6 weeks, we've had demand go down by 30 or 25 or 30 million barrels, and the market has actually struggled to balance. And so you see these weird things like minus $37 a barrel, which I get is not really indicative of the actual price of the barrel, but more, and Colin, correct me if I'm wrong here, the incremental value of storage space in May, right, versus that barrel. And so it's an anomaly, but still it's indicative of a struggle to reach balance. And I go back to the question I asked a minute ago of myself. Is there something that's happening that might have a long-term detrimental effect to the entire oil and gas industry? And that right now, I believe that there's a risk of that. I believe that as refining runs are dropped now to 13, 14 million barrels a day in the United States, and when you look at how much sweet crude they can run in that run, and you say, man, with storage filling up, we're going to have to drop our production without any excess capacity. We're going to have to drop our production maybe as low as 7 million barrels, 8 million barrels a day, so that the refiners have enough heavy blend of crude or heavy crude to blend with that and still run their refineries at 13 million barrels a day. Well, at 7 million barrels a day, I don't know what price of crude we would see. I mean, it might be that we're in the $1, $2, $3 a barrel range for a while. And at that point, the long-term damage to the entire industry but that's what the damage to the industry might last for years, maybe even decades. And so that's the rationale that I think everyone's trying to wrap their heads around is there going to be some damage, especially with this 40 million barrels of Saudi crude that's coming in, that's going to fill up storage. With all this happening, that it might be hard for the industry to respond because there's just not a normal market. And I would compare it to this, right? Right now, you go outside and you see that government's basically shut down all restaurants. And if you told those restaurants, hey, you know what? You can't do any business at all. None. And so, with that, the restaurant said, oh my gosh, I mean, literally there's no work to do anywhere. And so I can't pay rent. I have 0 employees. All my loans are shutting in. Then when it came time for those restaurants to open back up, they would say, it's going to take me months to open back up. However, if you said, look, there's going to be some limitation. However, you can still keep a basic operation going. You're doing to-go food. You get down to a very small skeleton crew, still paying rent, still keep your supply chain of goods coming in. Then when it comes time to ramp up, you can do it fairly quickly. So it's a very long explanation to say where I'm at today in my head is I do think there is going to be some long-term detrimental impacts to the industry that may take a decade to work out. That there's going to be so much bankruptcy in the service company space that literally there won't be enough service companies to allow response to the market. That some of these shut-ins are going to bankrupt so many companies that there's just not enough to actually operate these wells for a while. And I'll tell you, one of my big fears is that we get to a year and a half down the road and demand actually starts to come back and we get to 85, 90 million, 95 million barrels a day. And there's such a lack of ability to bring oil back to the market that oil spikes to $120, $130 a barrel. At that point, the public sentiment while we're in the middle of a recovery to really high gasoline prices might be untenable. So it's a lot of information. Say that right now I'm considering that proration might be something we need to do because of all these weird scenarios.
So one thing, I mean, and of course, without question, we're in extraordinary times, to say the least. So you have to think outside the box in those times. I think what I notice with companies and just the industry broadly is the strategic value of the industry to the United States is huge. The economic value of it is huge. The miracle it's created for all of us is huge. The fact that it's going to be damaged, there's no question. So on so many things, people agree. I think where what I notice is people are watching the government do so much right now, and the government is getting so involved, and arguably we need that. But you get to some line where people say, I really don't want one more government intervention, because once they come, they don't tend to go home, or the next time they come with more concerns or demands. And it just, I feel like there's a part of the country that wants to stop turning to the government for the answer. And you're a Texas Aggie, so I know there's a free market guy, free market heart beating in there. How do you address that question?
It's a great question, man. And by the way, I'm one of those. So I'm in that camp that says, man, we got to be so careful because A, I don't want the government in my business, and B, I don't want to have to figure out how to get it out, because once it gets in, it's really hard to do that. And so I am not only sympathetic to those concerns, those are my concerns. And one of the things that we have talked about, in fact, today in conference that I presented was, if we do something, then we need to set a very low floor that when demand globally comes back to that floor, proration is lifted. I proposed the number today of 85 million barrels a day, which would still be 15% off of our February levels. And which by the way, you look in history, there's never been a time when our demand has dropped by 15%. So if we said, we throw this threshold in that if we do something, proration will be lifted when we get to 85 million barrels, that would set a very high bar for the Railroad Commission to ever get involved in this again. Frankly, one that we may never see again.
And I noticed in your bio, I don't know if people know this, but you're, I think, one of the first engineers to be on the Railroad Commission in, 50 plus years. You have an oil and gas company, you have, experience in the industry. How do you think that background affects your views as you have thought about what the Railroad Commission can do to help?
I would say, and to your point, man, I've spent 20 years in this business. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree. I've spent lots of work for Oxy and for Marathon before I started my own company, then went into public office. So this is all this is the space I've grown up in professionally. And, I go back to what I said a minute ago. Look, this is not really about any one company, or if this was just supply and demand and price wars, I would say there's no room for the Railroad Commission really to get involved in this. But this is about, you mentioned it a minute ago, look, being energy independent, which I believe we are today. I know we still buy foreign crudes and we need heavy blends of crudes to run our refineries, but we are, as far as the United States is concerned, it's a buyer's market. And so if any one country decided they weren't going to sell us crude oil anymore, that wouldn't really have a big impact on the price of gasoline or the price of energy here at home, barring maybe Canada. But everybody else, if the Saudis decided they weren't going to sell us crude oil anymore, fine. And that independence, that energy stability in the United States has paid dividends that most people can't even comprehend. When we've watched manufacturing come back to the United States in droves, tens of thousands of jobs. We've watched us compete in so many areas because of our access to affordable, reliable energy that the rest of the world doesn't have. I mean, that we gotta really try to protect that. And I think that's threatened right now. I think that when you think about the Saudis flooding the market, the Russians flooding the market in the middle of all this demand destruction, that if we end up in 10 years looking back saying, oh my gosh, man, remember when we were energy independent and now we weren't because of COVID-19 and how it destroyed the oil business? I think we would look back and say that it was not acceptable that we did nothing.
Well, let me, Mayor Payton, you've been patient, and we're so glad to have you. You're there as the mayor of, I dare say, the city we all love the most. It embodies the spirit of oil and gas and West Texas and entrepreneurialism and the can-do spirit. Would you just share with our audience what's going on there in Midland, how you're spending your day, what you're watching, obviously you got a lot of concerns, but thank you for joining, and please tell us what's on your mind.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. What I'm not watching is news. I've given up on Fox and CNN both, and only watch a ticker on MSNBC, because pretty much the way we are right here in Midland right now is everybody's in a state of shock, to be quite honest. I think back when this whole thing started, and I was sitting in Oklahoma City on a business trip, and I guess it was a Sunday night, and my son, who works there in Houston, texts me and says, uh-oh. And I'm like, what does that mean? You never want to get a text from your son that says, uh-oh.
No, I hate those. I've gotten a couple of
them. Yeah, I have too. And they were still living at home at the time, and he's working for FTI over in Houston. So I text him from my hotel room, and he says, turn on your Bloomberg app. And, that's when we all start figuring out, wow, something's going on here. So, you wake up Monday morning, and I forget what day it was, the very first part of March. And all of a sudden, I'm talking to my friends, and they said, they overreact like we all do. And they said, well, we're shutting everything down. Well, needless to say, we still didn't know what was about to hit us. So that same week, I'm still on a business trip, sitting in another hotel room on Thursday night. I wake up Friday morning to my mayor's phone. It's kind of like a bat phone that nobody wants. And my personal cell phone are blowing up. And it's 6:30 in the morning, and I cancel every appointment I've got in Oklahoma City, getting my rent car because I can't get a flight home. And the way I described it to someone recently was, it's a 7-hour drive from Oklahoma City to the city hall. I think the longest I was not on a phone call was 3 consecutive songs. And so that's a 7-hour drive taking phone calls to get here to Midland, to find out that every service company, every exploration company, every restaurant, everybody's now being affected. We're having city council meetings on an emergency basis to decide whether, literally for the first time in Midland's history, that we can find a mayor of Midland has to declare a state of emergency or a state of disaster. And that was a bit of a sobering thing when you realize, okay, here in the energy capital of the world, that we realize I'm getting ready to shut down business, and no one's ever done this before. We have no idea what this looks like. And we're trying to follow the steps of the governor. We're trying to listen to everybody. Then this thing turns into a national issue, all the way up to yesterday, when we're all sitting in our offices and watching history being made. And it's just a tremendous sense of anxiety around here. People are worried. I'm getting letters every single day from companies laying off employees, not by 20s and 25s, but by 500s and thousands. Probably one of the most disconcerting things in the early part of this, and this is not a West Texas joke, was that all the ammunition in every sports store sold out in about 3 days' time. And you got people standing in line outside at an academy, and the manager walking up before they open the store to say, if you're here for ammunition, you might as well go home. To hear people talk about how our home abuse situations are on the rise, that our foster care system is encountering a disaster, that we have mental care issues and mental health issues that are beginning to exacerbate. That doesn't equate to oil and gas in a lot of people's minds, but it does. Everything that's happening here is watching people's lives disintegrate. And so then that just brings a lot of energy to the discussion. When I hear Commissioner Sitton say, if the Saudis don't want to sell us oil, that's fine. Well, let me tell you what, let me put it in West Texas. There ain't nobody here that wants to buy Saudi oil, and there ain't nobody here that cares a thing about Saudis. And if you gave West Texans permission to go to the coast and make sure those boats never pull up, they'd do it. So, you're not even, it's very difficult to even sit down and calmly consider what's happening around you, because even when I was listening to everyone speak and you talk about supply and demand, I was just taking notes as you guys were talking. We can't even measure supply and demand and make reasonable decisions because we've got variables in this thing we've never had in our history. When you talk about variables related to an economic shutdown because of a virus, and now we're having literally radical debates about what does it mean to open the economy? Can I even tell a restaurant that you can open up and have 25% occupancy in your restaurant just to open the doors, and not to mention an oil and gas company having 25% of their workforce in their office? So even all of our models, you can't even determine your variables are so out of whack here that long-term planning is taking a hit as well. So, man, I hope I've answered a little bit of a question, but hopefully in the tone of my voice, you can tell that there's a lot of anxiety around here. There's not a lack of will. People really want to get back and they really want to fight. But people like Commissioner Sitton, people like myself, people like Governor Abbott, we're in Texas, and you just don't tell Texans what they can't do very long. And we're getting really close to that. And people want to pick a fight. They want to pick the right fight. And they want to pick a fight against the world. I mean, we've heard this phrase, we're energy independent. And so we've heard that this is a national security issue, that we're one of the most important oil fields in the world. And people are beginning to say, well, we're not acting like it. And so what's it going to take for us to act like it? I'll take a breath now if there's a question.
No, look, that was fantastic. You, because you reminded us all, this is not about what's happening in a screen or on a screen or in a boardroom or in any kind of meeting room. This is real life. And so many of your citizens are going through, these are real issues. Are you finding?
They really are. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, are you finding ways to channel, that West Texas fire that built that basin? Are you finding ways to organize people to help out? Like, how do you channel all that fired up spirit that we know you have and everybody else out there has?
Well, if you could see what people are doing here on a volunteer basis, for instance, our West Texas Food Bank, which is one of the largest food banks in the state, by the way, is taking care of now over 18 counties in the region, because the West Texas food banks in these other counties are volunteer-led by elderly people who are our most vulnerable people in our community. So they've shut down. And if you were to pull up to the West Texas Food Bank right here in Midland, at about 11:30, you would see a line of cars over a quarter mile long for people trying to find out if they can get food from the West Texas Food Bank. So people are stepping up to the plate in that regard. Foundations are stepping up to the plate in that regard. Our oil and gas companies everybody's stepping up to the plate. The public school system here. When Houston Public Schools stopped serving food to the kids, our system still stepped up. I mean, our public school system has become the largest homeschool network and food provider in the entire region as kids are being fed, and we still don't even know where all the kids are. Our public schools are driving buses out to remote sites, so they have hotspots on them so people can do their homework connected to a hotspot on a city bus in a city park. There's no lack of people being ready to do something and the will to do something. But also what we're having to do is leverage every relationship we have, whether it's me putting a plan together to reopen the economy and doing everything I can to get it in the right hands so that it gets close to the governor's desk, to us rallying West Texas mayors here, whether it's Amarillo, Lubbock, Big Springs, San Angelo, Odessa. We're all in this game together because we realize even though West Texas is the energy capital of the United States and one of the energy capitals of the world, we're still not the most important thing to Texas, even though it's kind of, we get kind of overrun by the I-35 corridor, by Houston, the Metroplex. So we got to fight our fights. And I've used that word fight a lot here. I'm going to find a punching bag after this. But we are, we're doing everything we can to put things in front of people in Washington, D.C. Probably one of the most interesting phone calls I got just the other day was when Senator Cornyn called me, and I learned a long time ago when it's a Washington, D.C. phone number on your phone, you might as well answer it. And, just asking him, hey, man, write the letters. I mean, write the letters to Saudi Arabia and make sure people understand we mean business around here. So it's doing everything you can possibly do. It's taking every phone call you can take. I've got phone calls coming up with Senator Cruz a little bit later on in the week, and just making sure that they realize what we mean. And I'll give you an example. I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors in January, perhaps the greatest waste of money in my entire life, to go sit at the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Washington, D.C., and find out it's just another arm of the Democrat Party. I mean, when the major spokesman is Mayor Garcetti from Los Angeles, you're not in for a fair fight. And I went to a conference there on energy. Nobody wanted to ask me a question, even though I presented a speech. I was ready to give a speech. And I walk outside the door of the conference, and the press is sitting there, and I just said to the press, I mean, they didn't know who I was, but I just said to the press, I said, are you guys interested in talking to anybody who has familiarity with the reality that if you want to get to a green revolution, there's only one way you can get to a green revolution, and that's through black. You want to have a conversation? Because you can't even drive your Tesla without the oil and gas industry. So we really just started this discussion, and then I went and met with the API and met with others in Washington, D.C., and just said, look, I'm not a publicly traded company, and the people in Midland, Texas give me a ticker tape parade if I pick a fight with the green lobby. So just let me know who to go talk to. And that's just what we're having to do. We're just having to say, listen, let us be a voice. Let us fight the fight for the industry. And let this industry do what it does best, which is grab itself by its bootstraps, pull itself up. And history has shown we're the most important place in the world. And just let us get after it and let us fight the fight. And don't let Saudi Arabia get in our way. And, eventually we'll get over this coronavirus thing and we'll fire this thing up.
So when you think about your comments, Mayor Payton and Commissioner Sitton, what you've been trying to do, it feels like this does need to be a national discussion, because part of the concerns about proration is, well, why just Texas? You need other people involved, and everybody understands that debate. But the industry is important to the nation. The nation produces oil and gas as big as the Permian is. We do it in many other states. And so the Washington, D.C., and I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking them to do. You have to be careful about asking for their help too. But Washington, D.C. is the place that should be watching this and saying, we've got to do something for all of these producing communities, not just Texas.
Well, I think that it's an excellent time for us to start having a different conversation and start writing different speeches to let people be aware of the fact that as this world is falling flat on itself economically, they're not going to come out of this worldwide recession because of a windmill or because of a solar panel. The fact of the matter, when the world picks its economy back up, it's still going to be driven by the oil and gas industry. And what I think's happened over the last 5 years, and let me go back to Mayor Garcetti, when he says to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the next decade is going to be the decade of the climate. That has one thing behind it, and you've heard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say it. That means we want to do away with oil and gas. Well, the reality is we haven't been willing to say, you know what, we're all for alternative energy sources, but the reality is you can't get to a greater environment without who we are and without what we do. And the fact of the matter is we are the food, the fuel, and the fiber of the nation. And it's our opportunity as an industry to start restating the narrative of how critical these people way out here in West Texas and these people up here in North Dakota and in Southeast Texas and Pennsylvania, it's time for us to seize a new narrative so that people realize, this cataclysmic event taking place on the globe will not straighten itself out without a robust oil and gas industry in an independent United States as far as energy is concerned. We get a chance to take the narrative, but we're afraid to, and so we don't. And we get a chance now to say how important we are to the revival of a worldwide economy.
If I could add to that.
Yes, sir.
Mayor Payton, I really appreciate your comments today. I mean, I'm reminded, frankly, how I'm the railroad commissioners are never, ever famous or popular. No one even cares. And in the last month, I've gotten more attention than I ever have. And my job is so much easier than yours. Really. I mean, the things that you're dealing with on a daily basis make my job look like child's play. So thank you for...
Well, you're very kind.
Yes, sir. I'd echo that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
What I would say is I love that your comments about the narrative. One thing that has always bugged me, and I say this probably a little bit I probably should say this with a little more caution, but I say, unless you work in the oil and gas business, I can pretty much guarantee you take it for granted. I mean, across this whole country. I'm not just talking about liberals and I'm saying people every day that I know who are conservatives. Well, those guys, oil companies make a lot of money. It just flows. It's just gasoline. The fact that we pay, if you stop at a convenience store and fill your car up with gas and go in and buy a bottle of water, you paid 7 times as much per volume for that water as you paid for the gasoline. I mean, it's just bonkers. And it's so taken for granted. And if there is a silver lining on all this, it may be that people may realize, holy cow, in the end, to get our economy back going again, Patrick, as you said, we're going to have the basics. We got to have food, we got to have shelter, we got to have roads, we got to have infrastructure, and we got to have energy. It's as basic as it gets. The country doesn't run without it. And who knows, maybe we'll get some opportunity to change that narrative and to regain some of that pride in what it means to be energy independent, and for people around the country to stop and say, man, you know what, to those guys in Mandan, North Dakota, or Midland, Texas, or wherever, to say, man, thank you. Because if it wasn't for what those guys are doing, the rest of our lives sure would be a lot harder. And I think there is a great opportunity to shape that message. Well,
I hope so. There's an opportunity for our business, which we keep saying our business. In Midland, when you move here, you're in the oil business. It doesn't matter. I was a pastor for 20 years and people said, what do you do? And I said, I'm in oil and gas. And, an interesting little thing about oil and gas in the church world is, when things are really, really good as a church, as a percentage of givers, your church numbers go down, but your money goes up. And then when the economy tanks, your percentage of givers goes up, but your money goes down. So everybody's like really praying hard right now and trying to pay their debt to the Lord Jesus Christ or whatever the thing might be. But, we had this conversation earlier that our industry was, Maynard, we talked about this on the phone the other day. Our industry was already in a correction. When you think about what was happening just a year ago, when Wall Street was saying, that's enough, you're going to have to learn how to do business. And I made the comment to you, and I'm sure all your listeners are going to correct me, but in my opinion, the oil and gas industry, because of the revolution of hydraulic fracking, was having to make a transition from mining to manufacturing. And so we were going to have to learn how to be a business that's sort of like Detroit. And we're all going to learn how to be a manufacturing business of energy. So you take a transition of learning to be a manufacturing business, and we're still trying to figure that out because we don't do that very well. We get it while it's good. And now you take a transition, and the transition gets hit by a Middle East battle between two nations. Then you add a coronavirus on top of that. It's not just a 1-2 punch. It's a 1-2 punch followed by another undercut. And so the industry has an opportunity, and whatever CEOs are listening to this, I know you're just a preacher, shut up. But there is a chance now to be ready for what's it going to be like for us to do business in the new normal, and how are we going to take the lead in that regard?
I think you guys both touched on something that, Colin, I know you talk about a lot, which is changing the narrative around energy so that we're all more thoughtful about our, as a global community, but as a U.S. community, we need to get more thoughtful about oil and gas. We need to not be so critical of an industry where we all depend on its services and products. And we all need to have an intellectually honest debate about which way we're going. But Colin, I know when the mayor was talking and the commissioner were talking, I could tell you were getting fired up. So I've got to get you
He's sat there very patient.
Well, he's got a great routine. He talks about kayaktivists who campaign against oil and gas while wearing their products. But
Exactly.
Colin, please jump in here.
Well, I mean, it's a tough act to follow, Mayor. I think you just nailed the entire human dimension that we all need to remember. I mean, these are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are our family members. This is real life, and this is real trauma. And particularly those children in the rural area that need the hot spot. I mean, man, we got to call Amazon or something and try to help out something there. And then, Commissioner, I thought, your description of the uniqueness of this situation really threaded the needle, where you can still be a free market person, but recognize that the severity of this event is so large that it truly is analogous to the restaurants, like you said. And to Maynard's point, what we often point out is people use the English term fossil fuel to describe hydrocarbons that may not be fossils or fuels. And they really miss the point of the manufacturing aspect of the petrochemical industry, the fact that their iPhone is made out of hydrocarbons, the fact that their kayak's made out of hydrocarbons, and so on. We could list the entire litany of products. And let's not even forget all of these face masks and all of this medical equipment that is so critical and in demand right now, from ventilators on down, are all made of hydrocarbons. So if we are so foolish to destroy this industry in this country, I agree 100% with the commissioner that there's going to be a price to pay. And so maybe, Commissioner, if I could ask you one question. I know that today there was the announcement that there's a delay on consideration of the pro-rationing. What would be your view on if there was a pro-rationing just within Texas, no exceptions, and no contingency, so it really is just Texas, but it followed that tapering that we saw from the OPEC plus pledge. So it wasn't just like a light switch that you're on and off at 85, but maybe it was more of a waterfall effect. Would that be something you think your fellow commissioners could get behind?
Possibly. I mean, I think in the end, the challenge, Colin, it's a great question. And we've had a lot of this kind of debate. The challenge is if Texas does anything on its own, just say it was big, even 3 million barrels a day, which would be, 60% of our state's production. Let me say this, it would have to be that big in order to make even a dent, because with supplies filling up, I mean, there's just going to be nowhere to put the oil. And so since I think something of that magnitude is just not tenable for us, the challenge is if we do something in the, say, 20% range, which is 1 million barrels a day, if Texas does it on our own, then by end of May, we're still going to fill up in Cushing, and that 1 million barrels is going to come off anyway. So it just doesn't have an impact, right? As you probably saw today, my recommendation is that we do 1 million in conjunction with or contingent on another 4 million coming off the market around North America and even other parts of the world. And even that, I will tell you, people have argued that, man, that won't even be enough. I mean, because of the wall of storage coming at us, really, I've heard some people say it's already too late. There's almost nothing you can do at this point because the cuts are going to happen when storage fills up, and we in order to have made something meaningful, we would have had to do it 3 weeks ago. And it may be true, but at this point, still trying to get enough volume out of the market in North America to give us some storage and some cushion in the supply chain is the primary objective. So the tapering you're talking about, great. I just don't know if that really has a bearing on the real challenge at hand, which is how do we get enough barrels off the market to maintain some storage?
Well, and don't forget the political reality that in 6 months we have an election coming up, and it's going to be substantial, and it's going to be a fight. And, you can look at our current president, and whether you like him or you don't like him, or you like his tweets or you don't like his tweets. I mean, the fact of the matter is cheap gas votes well, and cheap gas around the country votes well when people don't have any idea where it comes from or what's happening. And that's why we as energy producers have to keep the heat on about what a free market looks like. And I love what you said about the fact that nobody can do life. I mean, you can't even wear your Patagonia that's supposed to be like the most, environmentally friendly clothing unless it's made with something from the oil and gas industry. And so there's I'm a little bit concerned, no, not a little bit, I'm a lot concerned about what the political realities are going to be, considering it's May already. And it's hard to make, I understand where the commissioner is, because even as a mayor, it doesn't matter. I got half of the city that wants me to shut it down because we're all going to die of coronavirus tomorrow. And the other half of the city is telling me, let's just all kiss each other so we can get it, and then we'll have antibodies, And so it doesn't matter what I do, and it doesn't matter what he does, because there's no black and white here. We're dealing with unknowables, but the things we do know is eventually demand might go up, but the politics of this are going to get pretty nasty over the next few months. And that's why we as energy producers have to unify our voice and make sure we understand that, make sure that they understand how important this is.
Can I throw one other thing in here one thing we got to remind ourselves. If you look back over the last 70 years, the world's demand for energy has gone up virtually every single year. I mean, there's been a couple years where it flattened off, but it's never really gone down. Even through recessions, everything else, the demand for energy has gone up. And if you look over time, the percent of that energy that is oil and gas has also gone up. And some people, when I give this speech, they're like, wait a minute. But you got windmills and you got, solar panels. I mean, surely that's got, yeah, it is. That slice is getting bigger of the total, whatever it is, 600 quadrillion BTUs of energy a year. But with coal shrinking, oil and gas is actually becoming a bigger chunk. And when you look out 5 to 10 years, I mean, there's a debate as to how long it's going to take for us to really recover from this. I'm in the camp that believes it's going to be longer, not shorter. I think we're going to see probably 2 to 3 years of reduced demand while people are getting comfortable traveling again, feeling like they can't do everything on Zoom. I mean, it's going to, heck, even a 20% or 25% unemployment, just by the time that all works its way out, it's going to be a while. But you go 5 years out, the world's going to want 105 million barrels a day of crude oil. And it's going to have to come from somewhere. And it's hard to beat the Permian Basin. It really is. I mean, between our access to refining infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure, people that know what they're doing, the people like Mayor Payton who I mean, that kind of grit to get this stuff done. So I was just doing a presentation with a group of investors, I think yesterday. And I told them, look, if you're long in something, be long in energy, because I figure there's no way the world doesn't want more energy, and there's no way they don't want more of it from oil and gas in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think this is the theme that we hear from everybody. Most people realize if I can survive what we're about to go through, it will be good, 2, 3, 4 years out, or whatever the number is. But I've got to survive. And that's what we hear from so many companies. They're buckling down and trying to survive. Can I ask a last question of all of us? I have two, because I want to ask the mayor how we can help you. But why is there, you think about the federal government, there was discussion of the SPR. They were going to do it. It got pulled out of the congressional bill, et cetera. But the U.S. government is one of the only players on the planet that could make a massive purchase of oil. Even if they said, don't pull it out of the ground, I own it now, and could provide economic stability by making a massive purchase and stabilize the market. And then, Commissioner Sitton, to your point, when the world recovers, could start to sell down some of that ownership. Now, for the guy who raised the free market concern, I just tripled down on government energy. I went nuts. But Commissioner Sitton, have you come across ideas like that, government bodies making more purchases of oil during this period?
Yes, and in fact, to some degree, there have been. I mean, but it's in small quantities, right? It's people saying, "I've got a local Harris County Transportation Department saying, hey, let's buy up fuel right now and for whatever we can store," but not enough to bring any stability to the market. You mentioned the one, which was the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and I mean, let's just make this clear. Because of politics, the federal government didn't take an opportunity to buy 70 million barrels of oil at $10 a barrel that they could turn around and sell in 2 to 3 years, probably at a $50, if not $100 a barrel profit. So you're talking about, they missed an opportunity to just clear to the bottom line between $5 and $7 billion, right? I mean, this is not politics. It's just pure economics. Hey, we got a bunch of storage over here. We got the cheapest this product's ever going to get. Let's go buy it and stick it over here, and then we'll turn around and sell it and make $1 kajillion. I mean, why would you not do that? And it just kind of shows the mind-boggling state of our politics that was untenable to Democrats so much that they killed it out of the deal and missed the opportunity for the government to make $7 billion. I realize I'm rounding numbers. Maybe it was $5 billion, but I think it backs up what we've been talking about, which is the message, which is the lack of perception on what a gigantic opportunity this is. And so, yes, I've heard those ideas, Maynard, but I think that in general, anything outside of the normal lanes is so hard for people that it just isn't going to get done, unfortunately.
Well, you guys have been really generous with your time. I know our audience is going to really appreciate this immensely. Mayor Payton, last thought for you, for those of us who love Midland but don't live there, is there anything we could do to help you?
Well, absent my previous career's patent answer, which is pray for us, I think we're going to go march on Washington and ask Trump to use his War Powers Act so we can build a refinery out here in West Texas, which would be a nice thing for him to finally change that regulation before it gets overregulated again. But really, our people are doing a great job. They're fighting their fight. And for all of those people that are your audience that are in the oil and gas industry, as corny as this might sound, believe in what you do. Keep believing in what you do. Tell your representatives how important it is what you do. Write letters to Democrats and tell them how important it is, and send them something from Patagonia and tell them it was made from oil and gas byproduct. I mean, it's believe in what you do, because the narrative is so strong that if this was happening to the windmill industry or the solar industry, the Democrats would have passed that package and done something for the alternative energy. And it's because we have allowed the narrative to be taken from us. And you got to believe in what you do. Keep believing in what you do. Be proud of what you do. Be proud of what we do here in Midland. And, I'd tell you to write checks to the food bank, but our people are doing that. Really, Maynard, these people are hardy. They're just ready to get after it.
Yeah.
But we as a group and as an industry need to really sing our song, tell our story, change the narrative, and get ready for what's going to happen next.
Well, huge thanks to both of you guys. I think the theme with both of you is great big hearts that care about this industry. We all do. And so thank you, and stay safe. And to everyone who watched today, thank you. And we'll talk to you next week.